Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Santa Capricia. So today's episode is going to be about extending or developing the area to the north of the city. So on the last episode we developed the area to the south, this area here, just building some more kind of industrial areas and extending the freeway and the railway connections. But this episode I want to focus on the area to the north. So this part at the moment is kind of flanked by the hills. You've got this ridge of hills that separate the plain that Santa Capricia is built on, and the kind of valley and mountains to the north. And the valley will eventually become a suburb of Santa Capricia. That's where Somerset Valley will be located, which will be quite a nice kind of suburb. But in order to get to that stage, I wanted to build some kind of like a gap, like a ravine or a sort of canyon through the hills here. I didn't want to make it look too kind of obvious or too sort of sheer, so it becomes a little bit more terraformed than what it looks like at the moment. But I think the end result is a more kind of softer, more naturalistic appearance than just having a big, canyon cut through. And I imagined that these hills, they are hills really, they're not mountains, but these hills are kind of this sort of natural break, like a natural barrier between the main part of the city and the suburbs to the north. So this valley that I'm sort of building would be a good spot to build a sort of freeway connection between the two parts of the city. So here I'm just using or getting used to the terraform tool. I've used the terraform tool in the past, but probably not to the extent that I've used it today. I've been really getting to sort of grips with the intricacies of it, and it is quite intricate. You have very small tolerances, yet it seems to do quite a lot of kind of almost quite a lot of damage to the terrain if you're not careful. So you have to be quite light, do a light touch with it, otherwise you can very easily destroy the terrain. As you can see, it's a bit painstaking, a bit fiddly, but actually the end result sort of comes out quite nice. These hills are going to be I wanted to sort of maybe think about having a forest or some kind of a national park in this area, which I think might be quite nice to have it on the sort of edge of the city, so that citizens can escape to the clean air of the hills here. But of course, in the middle of that, you've got this great big freeway cutting through. So it's still very much an urban area rather than just a kind of wild area. So really just making sure that the height differences here aren't too excessive. You can see I'm having to push the freeway down quite a lot, even though you kind of sink the terrain quite a bit with this. It still seems to be quite steep, and I spent a long time trying to sort of adjust it and tweak it, just to get the freeway sort of less of a gradient really. And then after that I then went back to sort of terraforming a bit more of the actual hills here, because it's ending up just like a big trench at the moment, which is not the sort of look I want. I want something that looks more natural than that, because I don't think this is this area was man-made. I think this is a natural sort of canyon, a little bit like the sort of canyons above LA where you have all the sort of ravines and things, and eventually maybe there'll be houses and things built on the hills there, but at this stage I'm just focusing on the kind of the connections between the different areas. So talking about connections, what I'm now doing is setting up a new junction here. This freeway, which is the only freeway in the city at this stage, this is probably the most important freeway or interstate in the whole city, because it links the downtown area on the island and eventually ends up in the north of the map where the airport is. So it will provide a connection between the city centre and the airport, and along the way will also feed into various suburbs, and there'll be spurs coming off like this one here, feeding off to additional suburbs and areas of the city. So I-16, as it's known, Interstate 16, is, as I say, one of the key freeways in the urban area of Santa Capricia. Now, this smaller freeway is I-2, and I-2, I imagine, starts at this junction and carries on through the canyon to Somerset Valley, which is on the other side of the hills. And once it gets to Somerset Valley, I think I'll probably extend it even further, so it will disappear off into the sort of the bigger hills, the mountains further north on the edge of the map. So I-2 will also be quite an important connection between the city centre and its outlying suburbs. And I'm just adjusting these kind of off ramps and things here. I think this is the motorway. I think it's the concrete motorway that I'm using, or the concrete freeway, and I quite like this the textures on this asset. So I probably will keep using this for all of my freeways in Santa Capricia. But I do struggle sometimes, as you can see, with the just getting the curves and everything right. It's a fiddly business doing these junctions. It's not my favourite pastime, I must admit, but unfortunately it's a necessity, especially with Santa Capricia, because it's got a lot of these interstates and freeways and junctions all over the place. So I will need to be building quite a lot more of these before I have the city finished, and that's a long way off. So what I'm also doing, I started to raise up these kind of access, the off ramps, I guess, off I-16. But also I've got a railway line, which you'll see in a minute, which I tried to sort of thread through this junction. Originally I had it spanning it over the top on a bridge, but that just looked really unrealistic. So what I end up doing is, in fact, sinking the railway line into the ground and making a sort of retaining wall embankment, sort of not an embankment as such, but a sort of retaining walled trench that the railway then runs in, and that then disappears underneath the freeway. Although it's not a tunnel, it is still open to the air, and it seemed to fit in quite well, and you'll see that in a minute once I've stopped fiddling about with the junction. The other thing I wanted to do is to reduce the kind of bare, rocky feel to the hills here. And I'm using the mountain grass prop, which I think just really gives the whole hillside a much better kind of finish, almost like a much more realistic appearance, which I really love, and certainly will be using this asset in the future. Because I've got a lot of hills to cover, and also I want to put little dirt tracks on the side of the hills. Just maybe this one I think is going to connect to the freeway, so there's almost going to be like a little intersection there where you can come off and drive up into the hills. And this might well be part of this national park or national forest, which I'm thinking of putting on the hills here above the city. And this area here, I imagine, might be a sort of observatory or maybe telecommunications area on the top there. But there's quite a lot of hills to do in the city, and I've got a lot of work ahead of me for finishing those off with grass and terraforming them and so forth. So that's going to be an ongoing process, and very much just the beginning of that stage at the moment. So now this is me messing around with these railways, which sometimes struggle with, and you can see you get this kind of glitchy effect if you get too close to the edge of the road network there and making sure that I can actually get my my wagons underneath the bridges, and just using a retaining wall here just to give it a just to create this sort of embankment section on the side of the railway. This railway line will be kind of a commuter service, I think, now is what I'm thinking, rather than a freight line. I want, in addition to this, I want another line, a high-speed rail line, which I've been thinking about, and that will run between the city and the airport, and it will be just dedicated to connections to the airport. I'm thinking it might stop at Postilion, which is the kind of second city, which is not that far away from this area that I'm building here at the moment. It's just over by the river. But that area, I think, if I have a high-speed station there, and that can also, you can pick a train up and go to the airport from there as well. But that will be on a separate line, but it will be running probably through this area somewhere, but I've yet to plan all of that out. Now, what I've done here is I've just put a national road in that just goes underneath the bridge, just making sure I'm planning ahead. I've got roads there set up, and then I'm using this sort of concrete sort of base from I'm not sure what it's from actually, but it works really well as a kind of base to the freeway bridge there. You'll also notice that I've converted that into a PO, or procedural object asset, which means that I can edit it because I'm on an angle there with the road, so I had to push the vertices to get the correct shape, and I could have done it with blocks, but it would have been fiddly business, and as it was, if I just converted one block and then adjusted it to create the angle, and it worked really well, which then got me thinking about this little sort of railway bridge, or twin railway bridge, because you see you get this strange detail where the bridge stops short of the ground, and I don't like that. That just looks not great. So what I thought about doing was then putting like a concrete footing either side of the bridge to give it almost a better, like it would be in reality, with a sort of concrete buttress that then supports the bridge. So you can see here I'm putting these I think these are little concrete walls, but then converting them to PO objects and adjusting them, and or PO assets rather than not PO objects. But PO assets are very, very useful, and I can see that going ahead with the city, I'm going to be using the PO assets a great deal more, because it's a really good way to get these sort of details working, which I probably could do before, but now it's just so much easier, and I can scale them down, I can move them up and down like you can see there. I can rotate them anywhere I want. So I think the flexibility that PO offers is a huge step forward for the game, and it really makes the game now almost a 3D, almost like a 3D software in itself rather than just a game, because I'm obviously interested in not so much playing the game, more the fact that I can build something that's in my head, that I can imagine, and this is a way to, PO is a way to actually make that a reality. And you can do little things like this. You just stretch the tile, span it across rather than making lots of separate tiles, and that just covers that gap up. So it's just getting used to how PO works. It works in a slightly strange way, although I'm not really complaining because I'm kind of used to how it works now, and it has its own quirks. But I think it's something that you'll see me using a lot more. Now, just going back to some of the terraforming, I wanted to kind of do something a bit different. I got a little bit bored of doing all the freeways and railways and everything, and I wanted to do something that you sometimes see in American cities, particularly in the drier, more arid regions, which is a big water tank on a hill. So not a water tower as such, but a water tank. And this I kind of thought, well, I don't think this is going to be a functioning building. It's purely going to be a kind of prop. And what I decided to do is then convert an oil tank into a PO object or PO asset, and then plant that on top of the hill. So you'll see in a minute, once I've finished adjusting these little sort of dirt roads that go up the side of the hill here, that I'll put a water tank on the top. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I've got this oil tank, and I'm going to convert it into a PO asset, procedural object, and promptly delete it. So I didn't mean to do that. I'm still getting used to how PO works, but in effect, when you turn it into an editable mesh, which is what I'm doing here, you get all these sort of vertices, I suppose what you call them, and then you can move all of those and scale them or rotate them, whatever you want to do with them. And I found that what I wanted to do was drop those pipes or get rid of those pipes. I can't delete them, I don't think, but I can sink them into the ground. So that's what I decided to do, is literally just push them down into the ground. So now all you really see is the tank itself, and then there it goes on top of the hill. So I mean, if you want to, you could scale that up, make it a bit bigger, a bit smaller, but I think the size of it seems to work quite well there, and it just gives the city I just quite like that idea of having these sort of water tanks up on the hillside there above the city. It would be quite a good place to go to just to get a nice view, and putting these old fences round, I think the Byronics. Fences I've used quite a lot in the city because they're really, really highly detailed asset, and I wanted to make it look as if the water tank was maybe redundant now. It was just a kind of it's not being used anymore as a water tank. Yeah, just sort of finishing off some of the details on the top, which you'll see in a minute in the cinematics. Which means we are getting towards the end of this episode, and I hope it's been of interest. It's been a little bit different. We've done a bit of terraforming and a bit of road building, and also a water tank, which I don't think I've seen that many sort of water tanks out there on video. So hopefully that's been a bit different. But yeah, so if you've enjoyed it, please do subscribe to the video. Please give me a thumbs up if you've enjoyed the video, or give me a thumbs down if you thought the whole thing was terrible. And I will explain a little bit more about what I'm doing here in the next episode, because that's something that it's to do with my workflow more than anything. But I will explain what's going on there in episode number 5, which I don't yet know what episode 5 will be about, but I've got some ideas. But until episode 5 comes out, I'm going to leave you with my cinematics, and hope you enjoyed this video.